I'm Rosa, 58 years old, a retired financial advisor who raised my son Jackson alone after my husband died when he was only 5. I worked hard, saved carefully, and made sure Jackson had everything he needed. I never imagined my son would demand I pay $300,000 for his wedding. When I refused explaining my limited retirement funds, he actually sued me. I thought I knew heartbreak before, but nothing prepared me for this betrayal. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're from and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to see how I finally stood up for myself after decades of sacrifice. I grew up in a small coastal town in Maine where life was simple but good. My parents taught me the value of hard work and saving for the future. I met my husband Thomas in college, and we married right after graduation. We were young and in love with big dreams for our future together. Thomas was brilliant, kind, and had just started a promising career in engineering when Jackson was born. We were so happy, thinking we had our whole lives ahead of us. But life had other plans. When Jackson was just 5 years old, Thomas was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. Within 8 months, he was gone. I was 32, a widow, with a kindergartner, and overwhelming grief. The medical bills had drained our savings despite the insurance, and I suddenly found myself as the sole provider for our little family. I still remember that first year after Thomas died. I would put Jackson to bed, then sit at our kitchen table with bills spread out, crying silently so I wouldn't wake him. I took any job I could find during school hours, then studied at night to earn my degree in financial planning. There were times I survived on coffee and Jackson's leftover macaroni and cheese because I couldn't afford food for both of us. Despite our financial struggles, I was determined that Jackson would have opportunities. I worked 3 jobs at one point, exhausted, but driven by the promise I made to Thomas that our son would never feel deprived. Christmas presents came from thrift stores, carefully cleaned and wrapped to look new. I mended clothes instead of buying them. I skipped doctor appointments for myself to pay for Jackson's school trips. By the time Jackson was in middle school, my career had stabilized somewhat. I was working for a financial planning firm and slowly building a client base. We weren't rich by any means, but we could afford a modest home in a good school district. I still remember how proud I felt when I could finally enroll Jackson in private school for his freshman year. His education was always my priority, even when it meant I continued driving my 15-year-old car that broke down every other month. Jackson was a bright boy, always at the top of his class. I beamed at every parent-teacher conference when his teachers praised his intelligence and work ethic. I thought that all my sacrifices were worth it, seeing my son thrive, despite losing his father so young. I worked overtime and weekends to pay for summer academic programs, sports equipment, and eventually college applications. When Jackson was accepted to an Ivy League university with a partial scholarship, I cried with joy. I refinanced our home to cover the remaining tuition costs. I was so proud watching him walk across that stage at his high school graduation valedictorian with a bright future ahead. I thought I had succeeded as a mother, giving my son the foundation he needed despite our loss. Looking back, I see now that the changes in Jackson began during college. His calls home became less frequent, and when we did talk, he mostly discussed his new friends from wealthy families. He spent holidays at their vacation homes instead of coming back to our modest house. I told myself this was normal, that he was just expanding his horizons and making connections that would help his future. During his junior year, Jackson called to say he needed a new laptop and winter clothes for networking events. I sent him $3,000, nearly emptying my emergency fund. A week later, I saw photos on social media of him in Cancun with friends during spring break. When I carefully mentioned it, he became defensive, saying he deserved a break from his rigorous studies and that successful people know how to network. I pushed my doubts aside. After all, I wanted him to have experiences I never could. When he graduated and announced he was going to law school, I was concerned about the additional cost but supported his decision. He assured me that with his connections and talent, he would easily land a high-paying position afterward. I took out another loan against my retirement to help with his first-year expenses. Jackson met Sophia during his second year of law school. She was the daughter of Walter Gregory, a real estate developer known for luxury properties along the East Coast. From the first time Jackson mentioned her, there was a reverence in his voice I had never heard before. When he brought her home during a brief visit, I understood why. Sophia was undeniably beautiful, with the polished appearance of someone who had never worried about money. She was pleasant enough during our brief meeting, complimenting my quaint home and asking if the neighborhood was up and coming, as though searching for something positive to say about where I lived. I was happy that Jackson had found someone he clearly adored, but I felt a twinge of concern at how he looked to her for approval before speaking. Still, I convinced myself that my son was in love, and that was what mattered. When they announced their engagement after dating for just 8 months, I expressed genuine happiness while privately wondering if they were rushing. The first dinner with Sophia's parents was an experience I will never forget. Walter and Patricia Gregory invited us to their waterfront mansion for what they called a simple family dinner. I spent a week's grocery money on a new dress so I wouldn't embarrass Jackson. The moment I walked into their home with its marble floors and priceless artwork, I knew I was out of my depth. Patricia air-kissed my cheeks and commented that Jackson had done well for himself despite his humble beginnings. Walter barely acknowledged me until he learned I was a financial advisor, at which point he asked pointed questions about my client portfolio that made it clear he found my career unimpressive. Throughout that dinner, I felt Jackson watching me anxiously, as though afraid I would use the wrong fork or say something inappropriate. I had never seen my son so tense, so desperate for approval. By the time dessert was served, I understood that in Jackson's eyes, I had become someone to overcome, rather than the mother who had sacrificed everything for him. 3 months after the engagement, Sophia's parents hosted an extravagant engagement party at their estate. 200 guests mingled under crystal chandeliers in a tent larger than my entire house. A string quartet played while servers circulated with champagne that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. I wore the same dress from our first dinner, having nothing else suitable for such an occasion. Jackson introduced me to his law school friends and colleagues from the firm where he had recently started working. Each time he quickly added that I was a self-made woman who had done the best she could as a single mom. I smiled through these introductions, feeling more like an exhibit than a guest of honor. During the party, Sophia's mother cornered me by the dessert table, champagne glass in hand. "We're so excited about the wedding plans," she gushed. "The Four Seasons in Aspen is just magical in winter. Of course, we had to book it 2 years in advance, but Walter pulled some strings." My smile froze. Aspen? I didn't realize they had decided on a destination wedding. Patricia blinked as though surprised by my ignorance. "Oh yes, Jackson and Sophia finalized the venue months ago. Didn't he tell you it will be the event of the season? 300 guests, celebrity chef, ice sculptures, the works." I nodded as though this wasn't completely new information. Later that evening, when I finally got a moment alone with Jackson, I asked about these elaborate plans. "It's going to be amazing, Mom," he said, eyes bright with excitement. "Sophia deserves a perfect day. Her parents have connections with everyone who matters." "It sounds wonderful," I said carefully, "but also quite expensive. I hope you two are being mindful of starting your married life with solid financial footing." Jackson's expression cooled instantly. "Sophia's used to certain standards. We can't have a backyard wedding with grocery store cake just because that's all you can imagine." His words stung, but I kept my composure. "That's not what I meant. I just want you to be thinking about your future together, not just one day." "We are thinking about our future. These connections matter in our world." He emphasized our world in a way that clearly excluded me. "Anyway, we should talk about this later. Sophia's looking for me." A week later, Jackson invited me to coffee. I arrived hoping to reconnect with my son, to find the boy I raised beneath this new status-conscious exterior. Instead, he spent 20 minutes describing the wedding plans in greater detail, while I calculated the astronomical cost in my head. "The thing is, Mom," he finally said, stirring his untouched latte. "We're expecting family to contribute. Traditionally, the bride's family handles the reception, and the groom's family covers the rehearsal dinner and bar." I took a deep breath. "Jackson, I want to help with your wedding, but I'm living on a fixed income now. My retirement savings are modest, and I need them to last potentially 30 more years." He waved away my concerns. "You own your house outright. You could take out a small loan." "I don't own it outright," I corrected gently. "I refinanced for your college and law school. Remember, I still have 15 years of payments." Jackson frowned as though I was being deliberately difficult. "But you must have investments, retirement accounts." "Yes, but they're not excessive. I've calculated what I need for retirement, including potential healthcare costs as I age. I can't risk depleting those funds." I reached for his hand, which he pulled away. "I can contribute something reasonable, but not what I suspect you're expecting." "How much?" His voice was cold, businesslike. "I could manage maybe $10,000, I offered, knowing even that would require careful budgeting. Jackson laughed, a harsh sound I had never heard from him before. $10,000, the rehearsal dinner alone will cost twice that. The bar package starts at $40,000. I felt my stomach drop. "Jackson, that's simply not possible for me." "We'll see," he said, standing abruptly. "Sophia's parents expect certain things. I can't disappoint them because you're being selfish." The word selfish echoed in my mind long after he left. Had my lifetime of sacrifice for him meant nothing? Over the next few weeks, the pressure intensified. Sophia's parents made pointed comments at every opportunity about family obligations and stepping up. Sophia began sending me links to mother of the groom dresses costing thousands with notes about coordinating with their color scheme. I tried repeatedly to speak with Jackson alone, but Sophia was always there, steering the conversation back to wedding details. When I suggested more affordable alternatives, they were dismissed immediately as tacky or embarrassing. 3 months before the wedding date, Jackson and Sophia invited me to dinner at an upscale restaurant where a single entree cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I assumed it would be another discussion about wedding expectations, but I wasn't prepared for what actually happened. After ordering, Jackson placed a leather portfolio on the table between us. "We've prepared this for you," he said, sliding it toward me. "It breaks down all the costs we expect you to cover as the groom's mother." I opened it with trembling hands to find a professionally designed document titled Wedding Financial Responsibility Agreement. Inside was an itemized list of expenses totaling $300,000, including the rehearsal dinner bar service, transportation for guests' accommodations for the wedding party, and various other items. "I can't possibly afford this," I whispered, closing the portfolio. "We've calculated that you have approximately $450,000 in retirement assets," Sophia said matter-of-factly. "This represents just 2/3 of that." I stared at her in shock. "How do you know about my private financial information?" Jackson shifted uncomfortably. "That's not important right now. What matters is that you have the means to contribute to our special day." "Jackson," I said quietly, "even if I had twice what you think I do, I would not spend it all on a single day. That money represents my entire future security." "What about my future?" he demanded. "My relationship with Sophia's family, my professional connections all depend on this wedding meeting expectations." "I raised you to value relationships based on character, not money," I replied, my voice shaking. "And look where that got you," he snapped. "A small house, a modest retirement, no influence. I want more than that." I felt as though I was looking at a stranger wearing my son's face. "I won't sign this," I said firmly, pushing the portfolio back. "I can offer $30,000 as a wedding gift, which is still more than I can comfortably afford." Jackson's face flushed with anger. "That's your final answer?" "Yes," I said, gathering my courage. "I love you, but I won't bankrupt myself for an extravagant party." "Then you've made your choice," he said coldly. "Either you provide what we're asking, or don't bother coming to the wedding. In fact, don't expect to be part of our lives at all." Sophia placed her hand over his. "Perhaps your mother doesn't understand what's at stake. My parents have connections that could help her business too." "I understand perfectly," I said, standing up. "I understand that my son values money and status more than his relationship with me. I'm sorry you feel that way, Jackson. My offer stands, but I won't be threatened or manipulated." I walked out of the restaurant with as much dignity as I could muster, then cried the entire drive home. The shock of Jackson's ultimatum left me reeling. For days I could barely eat or sleep, replaying our conversation and wondering where I had gone wrong as a mother. Had I somehow raised a son who valued money over family, or had Sophia and her parents changed him that fundamentally? I called my closest friend Julia, who had known Jackson since he was a baby. She came over immediately, listened to the whole story, and was furious on my behalf. "You gave that boy everything," she said, handing me another tissue. "You worked yourself to the bone so he could have opportunities, and this is how he repays you, by treating you like an ATM. Maybe I didn't teach him proper values," I said, my voice small. "Maybe I indulged him too much, trying to compensate for his father not being there." Julia shook her head firmly. "Stop that right now. You were an amazing mother. This is about Jackson making choices as an adult, choices influenced by people who measure worth in dollar signs." After a week of emotional turmoil, I made my decision. I wrote Jackson a letter explaining that I loved him unconditionally, but could not compromise my financial security. I enclosed a check for $30,000 as a wedding gift, reiterating that this was my final offer. 2 days later, the check was returned, torn in half, with a note saying, "All or nothing, you've been warned." I tried calling, but my calls went straight to voicemail. I sent emails that received no response. It was as though my son had erased me from his life because I wouldn't bankrupt myself for his wedding. A month passed with no communication. I was starting to think Jackson's threat to cut me off had been empty when there was a knock on my door. A young man in a suit handed me a large envelope and asked me to sign for it. Inside were legal papers. My son was suing me. The lawsuit alleged that I had verbally promised to pay for wedding expenses and that Jackson had made financial commitments based on that promise. It claimed I had caused emotional distress and financial hardship by reneging on this agreement. The documents demanded payment of $300,000 plus legal fees. I sat on my couch, papers trembling in my hands, unable to comprehend how my child could do this to me. The boy I had nursed through chickenpox, taught to ride a bike, helped with homework until midnight, was now taking me to court. That night was the lowest point in my life since Thomas died. I seriously considered liquidating my retirement just to end this nightmare. But something kept me from making that call, a small voice reminding me that I deserved better than to be bullied by my own child. The next morning, I called Julia again. "I need a good lawyer," I told her. "Jackson is actually suing me." Julia was silent for a moment, then said, "I know someone, Harold Grant. He specializes in elder law and financial abuse cases." "Financial abuse? I'm not being financially abused," I protested. "What would you call it when your adult child demands your retirement savings and sues you when you refuse?" Julia asked gently. "At least talk to Harold." Harold Grant was in his 60s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. He listened carefully to my story, taking detailed notes. "Mrs. Wallace," he said when I finished, "what your son is doing isn't just wrong. It may be illegal on several levels. His lawsuit has no merit, but I'm concerned about how he knew the details of your financial situation." Sophia mentioned a specific figure, I admitted. I have no idea how they got that information. Harold's expression darkened. With your permission, I'd like to investigate this further. There are some red flags here that go beyond a frivolous lawsuit. I gave Harold permission to access my financial records and investigate Jackson's claims. What he uncovered over the next few weeks left me stunned. There have been multiple unauthorized attempts to access your accounts over the past year, Harold explained during our follow-up meeting. The IP addresses match your son's home and office. That can't be right, I protested. Jackson would never. Harold slid a folder across the desk. We've also found emails between Jackson and Sophia discussing strategies to pressure you into paying for the wedding. They refer specifically to information they shouldn't have had access to. As I read the printouts, my hands shook. There in black and white was evidence that my son had been plotting against me for months. There's more, Harold said gently. We found irregularities in your late husband's estate. Did you know Thomas had a small life insurance policy through his employer? I shook my head. There was the main policy we used for funeral expenses and medical bills, but I don't recall a secondary one. That's because it appears the notification was intercepted. The beneficiary was changed shortly before the benefits were paid out. Jackson would have been 21 at that time, just gained access to accounts as an adult. I felt physically ill. Are you suggesting my son stole from me? Harold nodded grimly. We've uncovered evidence of systematic financial exploitation dating back several years. Small withdrawals from your accounts intercepted dividends, even a small inheritance from your aunt that you never received. That night, I went through boxes of Thomas's papers that I had kept all these years. In an old journal, I found entries about additional retirement savings he had been setting aside as a surprise for me. Funds I had never known about. With growing horror, I realized Jackson had been stealing from me for years, taking advantage of my trust and my lack of attention to financial details despite my profession. The betrayal was so profound, I could barely breathe. The next day, I authorized Harold to file a countersuit against Jackson for fraud, financial exploitation of a family member, and elder financial abuse. Harold explained that while I was only 58, certain protections could still apply given the nature of the exploitation. Over the following weeks, Harold and his team methodically gathered evidence. They subpoenaed bank records, recovered deleted emails, and interviewed former colleagues of Jackson's who had witnessed concerning behavior. They discovered that Jackson had also helped Sophia's father hide assets during a previous divorce, suggesting a pattern of financial dishonesty. As the court date approached, I vacillated between determination to hold my son accountable and heartbreak at the complete destruction of our relationship. But with each new piece of evidence Harold uncovered, my resolve strengthened. This was no longer just about a wedding. This was about years of calculated betrayal by my own child. The courthouse was an imposing building of stone and glass that seemed to reflect my anxiety back at me as I approached the entrance. I had chosen a simple navy suit, wanting to appear respectable but not wealthy. Harold met me at the steps, his briefcase bulging with documents. "Remember," he said quietly, "stay calm no matter what they say. Let the evidence speak for itself." Inside, Jackson was already seated with his attorney, a sleek woman in an expensive suit. He didn't look at me when I entered. Sophia sat directly behind him with her parents. Walter Gregory looked bored, as though this was a minor inconvenience in his busy day. Patricia studied me with barely disguised disdain. As the proceedings began, Jackson's attorney presented their case with practiced precision. She painted a picture of a devoted son who had relied on his mother's promise to contribute to his wedding, only to have that promise cruelly withdrawn. She claimed I had caused significant emotional distress and financial hardship to the young couple. Mrs. Wallace repeatedly assured her son that she would help make his special day everything he dreamed of, the attorney claimed. Based on these assurances, commitments were made, deposits paid. Her sudden reversal left my client scrambling to fulfill obligations. I watched Jackson nod solemnly at appropriate moments, playing the part of the wounded son perfectly. When it was his turn to testify, he spoke about our close relationship through the years, carefully emphasizing his academic achievements and career success. "I always believed my mother was proud of me," he said, his voice catching slightly. "That she wanted the best for me. The wedding was important not just for personal reasons, but professional ones. In my field, connections matter." He went on to claim that I had verbally promised to take care of the traditional expenses, and that he had interpreted this as covering the rehearsal dinner bar and transportation at minimum. He said I had never mentioned any financial limitations until just before the wedding. When my turn came to testify, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I spoke plainly about my life as a single mother, the sacrifices I had made for Jackson, and my careful planning for retirement. "I never promised to pay for an extravagant wedding," I stated firmly. "I offered $30,000, which was already stretching my budget considerably. When I explained my financial situation, my son threatened to cut me out of his life if I didn't give him $300,000, essentially 2/3 of my retirement savings." The judge, an older woman with shrewd eyes, asked several pointed questions about my finances and Jackson's understanding of them. I answered honestly, explaining that I had always tried to teach Jackson responsible financial management, including the importance of saving for retirement. As the first day progressed, Harold called several witnesses who had known us through the years. Jackson's elementary school teacher spoke about the times I had worked night shifts to afford school trips for him. His childhood best friend described holidays where I had clearly gone without to ensure Jackson had gifts and special meals. Financial experts testified about the reality of retirement planning, explaining how withdrawing $300,000 would significantly impact my long-term security, potentially forcing me to work well into my 70s or face poverty in my final years. By late afternoon, I could see the judge's expression had shifted from neutral to concerned. She asked increasingly pointed questions of Jackson's witnesses, particularly when inconsistencies arose. When Jackson's attorney attempted to portray me as wealthy based on my career as a financial advisor, the judge requested specific documentation of my actual income and assets. Just before adjournment, Harold stood. "Your Honor, we have completed our defense against the plaintiff's claims. At this time, we would like to introduce our countersuit." The courtroom, which had been quietly attentive, suddenly tensed. Jackson, who had been whispering to his attorney, jerked his head up. Harold continued. "We have evidence that the plaintiff, Jackson Wallace, has engaged in systematic financial exploitation of his mother over a period of years, including identity theft, unauthorized account access, and misappropriation of inheritance funds." The judge's eyebrows rose. "That's a serious accusation, Counselor. Do you have evidence to support these claims?" "Substantial evidence, Your Honor," Harold replied, handing a thick folder to the clerk. "We request that the court review these documents and allow us to present our countersuit in full tomorrow." Jackson's face had drained of color. His attorney was frantically flipping through her notes. Behind them, Sophia looked confused, then increasingly alarmed, as she leaned forward to whisper questions to Jackson. The judge reviewed the first few pages of Harold's documentation, her expression growing grave. "The court will accept this countersuit. We will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 to hear this evidence." As the judge left the courtroom, Jackson finally looked at me. The hatred in his eyes made me flinch, but I held my ground. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope that the truth would come out. The second day of court began with a different atmosphere entirely. Word had apparently spread about our countersuit, and several court employees found reasons to enter the courtroom as Harold prepared his presentation. Jackson and his attorney were huddled together, speaking in urgent whispers. Sophia sat alone, her parents noticeably absent until just before proceedings began. Harold started methodically establishing a timeline of suspicious activities involving my accounts. He presented bank records showing access attempts from computers registered to Jackson's home and office. He showed phone logs of calls to my financial institutions made from Jackson's cell phone on days when I had been out of town. Mrs. Wallace maintained separate accounts from her regular checking and savings, Harold explained. Accounts specifically designated for retirement. The plaintiff accessed these accounts without authorization on multiple occasions, sometimes withdrawing small amounts that might go unnoticed. Harold projected a series of transactions onto a screen. Note the pattern, Your Honor. Small withdrawals, typically under $500, made consistently on the first Tuesday of each month when Mrs. Wallace attended her book club. Always in cash, always from different branch locations. Bank employees testified about suspicious transactions and verification attempts. One branch manager described Jackson coming in with a power of attorney document that she had flagged as potentially fraudulent. The signature didn't match our records for Mrs. Wallace, the manager explained. When I questioned it, Mr. Wallace became agitated and left quickly. Next came the evidence about Thomas's life insurance policy. Harold produced the original beneficiary designation naming me as the sole recipient, then showed the changed form submitted 3 years after Thomas's death when Jackson was in college. The signature on this change form is a clear forgery, Harold stated, displaying both documents side by side. Our handwriting expert will testify that it does not match Mrs. Wallace's signature from that period or any period. Throughout this presentation, I watched Jackson's face transition from confident to concerned to openly panicked. His attorney was now frantically taking notes, occasionally leaning over to whisper to him. Sophia had moved several seats away from him, her expression a mixture of shock and growing anger. The most damning evidence came after lunch. Harold introduced emails between Jackson and Sophia discussing their plans to pressure me into paying for the wedding. I know exactly how much she has, Jackson had written. Trust me, $300,000 won't even dent her accounts. Another email read, Mom's always been a pushover. She just needs the right motivation. Threaten to keep her grandkids away in the future, that'll do it. The judge's expression darkened with each new piece of evidence. When Harold presented documentation of the inheritance from my aunt that had mysteriously disappeared, Jackson's attorney finally intervened. Your Honor, we request a brief recess to confer with our client, she said, her voice tight. The judge nodded. 15 minutes. During the break, I sat quietly with Harold while across the courtroom, Jackson and his attorney engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion. Sophia had moved to sit with her parents, all three of them looking increasingly disturbed. When court resumed, Jackson's attorney approached the bench. Your Honor, in light of new information, my client wishes to withdraw his lawsuit against Mrs. Wallace. The judge regarded her coolly. And the countersuit? Jackson's attorney glanced back at her client, who was now staring at the floor. We are prepared to discuss a settlement. I see, the judge said. Mrs. Wallace, are you and your counsel interested in settling this matter privately? Harold looked at me questioningly. This was my decision to make. I thought about all the years of deception, the manipulation, the threats. I thought about the son I had raised and the stranger he had become. I had come here seeking justice, not revenge, but I also knew that without consequences, nothing would change. No, Your Honor, I said clearly. I would like to proceed with our countersuit. Jackson's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had clearly expected me to back down to protect him, as I always had. Very well, the judge said. In that case, regarding the original suit brought by Jackson Wallace, I am dismissing all claims with prejudice. There is no evidence of any promise made by Mrs. Wallace to fund wedding expenses and considerable evidence of coercion and misrepresentation by the plaintiff. She turned her attention to our countersuit. Based on the evidence presented, I find significant cause for concern regarding potential financial exploitation. I am ruling in favor of the defendant's countersuit. The judge ordered Jackson to repay all funds that had been misappropriated with interest totaling nearly $90,000. She also awarded me damages for emotional distress and legal fees. Most significantly, she referred the case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges related to identity theft and fraud. Financial exploitation of family members is a serious offense, the judge stated firmly. The evidence suggests a pattern of deliberate deception spanning years. This court cannot ignore such behavior. As the judge announced her ruling, I glanced over at Sophia's family. Walter Gregory's face was contorted in horror, the blood draining visibly as the judge mentioned potential criminal investigation. I suddenly understood his reaction had nothing to do with concern for Jackson, but fear for himself. The man who had looked down on me was terrified that his own financial misdeeds, possibly related to Jackson's legal assistance in hiding assets, might now come under scrutiny. After the judge left the courtroom, Jackson approached me. His confidence shattered, his voice desperate. "Mom, please, you can't do this. A criminal record will ruin my career. I'll pay you back, I swear." I looked at my son, this person I had loved unconditionally for 28 years, and felt nothing but sadness. "You did this to yourself, Jackson. You betrayed my trust in the most fundamental way possible." "It was Sophia's idea, her parents' expectations," he began, but I cut him off. "Stop. Take responsibility for once. You made choices repeatedly to steal from me, to lie to me, to try to intimidate me. Those were your choices, not anyone else's." As security approached to escort him out, Jackson's desperate pleas faded. I walked out of that courthouse, not with triumph, but with the heavy knowledge that the relationship with my son might be broken beyond repair. In the months following the court case, I experienced a roller coaster of emotions. Some days, I felt empowered for standing up for myself. Other days, I was overwhelmed by grief for the relationship I had lost. The money Jackson was ordered to repay helped secure my financial future, but no amount could heal the broken trust between mother and son. I found unexpected support during this difficult time. Thomas's parents, who had maintained limited contact over the years, reached out after hearing about the court case from a mutual friend. They were horrified by Jackson's behavior and shared stories of how Thomas would have been so proud of my strength in facing this betrayal. "Thomas always said you were the strongest person he knew," my former father-in-law told me over dinner. He was right. Several of Jackson's childhood friends also contacted me offering support and company. Many admitted they had drifted away from Jackson in recent years as he became more status-obsessed and manipulative. It was both comforting and painful to hear their memories of the kind, thoughtful boy he had once been. One particularly difficult afternoon, when memories of Jackson's childhood left me sobbing at my kitchen table, Julia suggested I join a support group for parents estranged from adult children. I was reluctant at first, embarrassed to share my story, but eventually agreed. The group became an unexpected lifeline. Hearing others' experiences helped me understand I wasn't alone, that sometimes children make choices that separate them from loving parents despite our best efforts. One mother's words particularly resonated with me. "We can love our children unconditionally without accepting abusive behavior. Setting boundaries isn't the same as withdrawing love." Gradually, I began rebuilding my life. I used a portion of the settlement to create a small scholarship fund in Thomas's name at the local community college, specifically for single parents pursuing education. Helping others who were struggling as I once had brought a sense of purpose to my pain. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected while focusing so intensely on Jackson's needs and ambitions. I rediscovered hobbies I had set aside years ago, taking a pottery class and joining a hiking group. Slowly, joy began to return to my days. The financial security I now had, without the constant worry of Jackson's demands, allowed me to truly enjoy my retirement. I took my first real vacation in 20 years, a 2-week trip to the national parks I had always dreamed of visiting. Standing at the rim of the Grand Canyon, I felt both my insignificance in the grand scheme of things and the importance of living authentically with the time I had left. 6 months after the court case, I was shopping at a local farmer's market when I literally bumped into Jackson. He looked different, thinner, the expensive watch and designer clothes replaced by simpler attire. For a moment, neither of us spoke, frozen in mutual shock. "Mom," he finally said, his voice uncertain. "How are you?" "I'm well," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite my pounding heart. "And you?" He glanced down. "Managing. The law firm let me go after everything. I'm working at a legal aid clinic now. Community service was part of my plea agreement." I nodded, unsure what to say. Part of me wanted to hug him to tell him everything would be okay. The wiser part remembered the calculated betrayal, the years of deception. "Sophia and I broke up," he continued when I didn't respond. "Her father was investigated for tax fraud after our case brought attention to some of his business practices. She blamed me." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I never wished for my son's unhappiness. Jackson shifted uncomfortably. "I've been seeing a therapist, working through some things. I understand now what I did, how wrong it was. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I'm trying to be better." For a brief moment, I glimpsed the son. I remembered the boy with a conscience and capacity for growth. But the wounds were still too fresh, the trust too thoroughly broken. "I hope that's true, Jackson. I really do. But I need more time." He nodded, accepting this boundary. "Can I call you sometime? Maybe in a few months?" I considered this. "You can write to me. Letters, not emails. I think we need to rebuild very slowly, if at all." "I understand," he said quietly. "Thank you for even talking to me today." As we parted ways, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. There was still love there, the kind that never truly disappears between parent and child. But there was also a new awareness that love alone isn't enough for a healthy relationship. Respect, honesty, and trust are equally essential foundations. That encounter reinforced an important lesson I had been learning. Maternal love doesn't obligate me to accept mistreatment. For years, I had confused sacrifice with love, believing that giving everything, including my own well-being, was what motherhood required. I now understood the difference between generosity and exploitation, between supporting a child and enabling harmful behavior. In the support group, we often discussed how society expects mothers to forgive anything to place our children's needs above our own, no matter the cost. Breaking free from that expectation was perhaps the most difficult part of my journey, but also the most liberating. I still don't know if Jackson and I will ever fully reconcile. True healing would require not just his acknowledgement of the harm done, but a fundamental change in how he values relationships versus material things. That kind of transformation takes time and sincere effort, not just words. What I do know is that I'm at peace with my decisions. I stood up for myself when it mattered, breaking a lifetime pattern of putting everyone else first. That quiet strength has changed how I move through the world, how I engage in all my relationships. I've learned that boundaries aren't walls, but healthy markers of self-respect. If you're facing a situation where someone you love is taking advantage of your generosity or kindness, remember that you deserve better. Financial exploitation by family members is painfully common, but rarely discussed. It thrives in silence and shame. By sharing my story, I hope to help others recognize the signs earlier than I did and find the courage to protect themselves. True family is defined by mutual respect, not obligation or blood alone. Love that demands your self-destruction isn't love at all. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and the other person, is to say no, to require accountability, to insist on change before reconciliation. Has anyone else experienced something similar with family members? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to protect yourself, even from those closest to you. Thank you for listening to my journey. Remember, it's never too late to stand in your own truth and reclaim your power.